Ladies and metalfish, this is your hard-boiled king of draw style, Daddy Janjo, baby. So, once in a while, I have a thought about what the game of Yu-Gi-Oh could add or change. I share a lot of it in my community page. One of those thoughts was, why is there no ice type in Yu-Gi-Oh? Typically, types in the game cover all sorts of bases, from basic ideas like plants and fish to more abstract ideas from aqua to pyro. But ice was never one of those, even as Konami added new types to the game like worm or illusionist. Ice is a common elemental theme in fiction. It's distinct enough to separate it from others under the water attribute umbrella. After all, you look at cards such as Snowman Eater, Mobius the Frost Monarch, or the Ice Barrier archetype, and something is clearly amiss. But what if I told you that Konami did in fact attempt an ice mechanic, and it failed? Let's thaw this idea out and explore. What's the deal with ice counters? I can count them. Why do they need to be ice? Jerry, I told you those ice counters were no good. George is getting angry. I know a guy that has ice counters. Bob Sacamano. Yeah. While never a type, there was an ice counter mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! Made to replicate the idea of using ice against your opponent. This was introduced in the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX manga that ran from December 2005 through March 2011. In the manga, the theme of monsters used the pre-existing counter mechanic to place an ice counter on enemy monsters, which prevented battle position change. Like other cards in the GX manga, this would eventually be adapted in the TCG, so many people can try these cards out in real life. What this led to were 6 cards that use ice counters that expanded the idea. First of which is Cold Enchanter, which lets you discard a card to place an IC, and Enchanter gains 300 attack points for each IC on field. Next is Ice Master, that can place an IC on a monster once per turn, and contribute itself to destroy all monsters with ICs. Snow Dragon places an IC on each monster when it's destroyed and sent to the grave. Snowman Creator, when summoned, places ICs equal to the number of water monsters you control. If 3 or more ICs were placed, then you can destroy a card. Snowdust Dragon can be special summoned by removing 4 ICs on the field, and monsters with ICs cannot attack nor change battle position. Finally, Snowdust Giant is an Xyz monster that can place ICs up to the number of revealed water monsters in hand. Also, non-water monsters lose 200 attack points for each IC on them. Yep, that's all. No spells, traps, and only monsters with 1 extra deck inclusion. And not even Ice Queen isn't on the gimmick. The 6 cards only spanned 2 sets. Duelist Genesis in 2008 and Abyss Rising in 2012. That's it. That is such a long time in between, with a lack of any support for a viable deck. Hell, Dark Scorpion even had a couple back row support. The archetype, if you could call it that, at best is a support engine in a different water deck. While they do synergize with water attribute cards like Ice Barrier and Crystal Girl, the ice monsters have a variety of types, with only 2 sharing the same, so they lack that compatibility aside from Rivalry of Warlords. In addition, they all have on-field effects that relate to counters, so combo potential is limited too. When you look at what each monster does with ICs, and it varies, it almost feels as if Konami themselves weren't sure on what the counter type was supposed to accomplish. Some can gain attack or use them to destroy enemy cards, while others simply place ICs on field. It's counterintuitive because Cold Enchanter can place an IC on itself to gain attack, yet Snowdust Dragon prevents other monsters with ICs from attacking, and while Snowdust Giant can reduce attack, Ice Master can simply destroy the monsters. To be fair, counters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always had a rocky road, with very few decks becoming meta-relevant like Endymion. Even decks with specific counters like Alien and A counters had its time in the sun, even if it wasn't for a long time, so Konami wasn't afraid from exploring this avenue. But the amount of support ICs got synergizes less than, say, even Dark Scorpions. It's almost as if Konami is dancing around the argument of including an ice type. I mean, it's reasonable to think that some employee brought it up at some point in the game's long existence. Ice counter monsters are a variety of types. Ice barriers are also composed of a variety of types, and all the ice thematic throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! Like Ice Knight, Ice Queen, the Ice Jade archetype, and many others, more than enough to justify the inclusion of said ice type, instead of dumping all the etc. ideas under the generic sounding Aqua umbrella. Did Konami have an idea or a plan for them and just forgot about it? Or maybe it just didn't get a popular enough internal vote? Like Air Neos, we may never know the answers we seek. And I don't want to hear the argument of, well, it's too specific to fit within the abundance of buoyant typings. Look, for every fish, we have Sea Serpent. Beast Warrior is an amalgamation of warrior and beast. For every dragon, we have Worm, Machine, and Cyburst, Spellcaster, and Illusionist. Technically speaking, dinosaurs are reptiles. See what I mean? Like Dark Scorpions, ice counters were dropped before they had any real potential by Konami, at least of this recording. No support in over a decade with no hope in sight. It's a shame because there's a lot you can do with these cards. Ice as a gameplay mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! Sounds so cool. Of course, you have to start from scratch with effects that use Ices as a stun strategy or a control deck, as many water decks tend to go towards. You can even do what I suggested early on and just make Ice a type with a whole wave of support. After all, it's interesting that Illusionist and Worm were type worthy and Ice was not. Konami isn't afraid to add new concepts in the game, and I understand many people don't want that, yet it's going to happen whether you like it or not. So we might as well have them make sense to the general thought of, yeah, I can see that, as it's not the craziest suggestion in the world. But I suppose if that actually ever to happen, then hell would have certainly froze over.